Hello and welcome to Property Matters, a weekly look at all matters property designed to be of interest to anyone who has an interest in the property market. And Property Matters is supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. Each week we focus on those big stories in the news involving properties, and this week got a bit of a political feel to it, but don't let that put you off. Got some really interesting debate to be had with our property expert Joe Joshi in just a second. Don't forget, of course, if you're watching, don't be afraid to put your comments in the comment section below, and if you'd like to get in touch with us, there is an email address, propertymatterstv@gmail.com. And of course, don't forget to like the page and subscribe and all that good stuff so that you know when we go live. So as I mentioned, joining us for our property discussion each week is Joe Joshi. Hello, Joe.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Nice Sunday morning again. And as Paul says, slightly political based, but part of the property world evolves around the politics of the world, and especially the politics of number 10. And I think we've had plenty of that over the last week in different shapes and forms. But we'll try and put a property spin on it for you.
Yes, it's been a big week for property in the news because we've had interest rates rising, which of course we must talk about with relation to property. And of course, Mr. Gove has been busy with his levelling up agenda on housing. So at least two of our stories today involve a political persuasion, but we'll be looking at the property side of that. And our first story to that end, of course, as I mentioned a moment ago, was the property industry's reaction really to the Bank of England raising base rates from 0.25% to 0.5% to try and curb inflation. Now, what's interesting here, Joe, is that the decision of the Monetary Policy Committee was actually split 5 to 4. So 5 people wanted to put it up to 0.5%, but the other 4 wanted it to go up to 0.75%. Of course, this is the first time there's been a consecutive rise since 2004. They were even thinking of putting it even higher, and of course they're expecting it to peak at 7.25% inflation, in April, which is nearly 4 times the target that they had for this year of 2%. So it's interesting how this is going to affect the property market. Clearly, many people are on fixed rate mortgages, so they're not going to feel any pinch just now, but when those deals come to an end, it depends on where we are at that point, of course. And the suggestion is also that, of course, low interest rates are having a big effect on that because it's making property seem even more affordable than perhaps it used to be. And even at just 0.5%, or even if they went to 0.75%, and the suggestion is that they may get to 1 or 1.25% by the end of the year. But even then, compared to recent history, Joe, that's quite low for interest rates, isn't it?
Yes, interesting subject. And of course, it's going to be a subject I think we're going to be covering quite a bit in the coming months because as the old adage goes, what comes down has to go up. And here is a scenario of exactly that. We've had the lowest ever interest rates in our history over the last, 5-6 years now. And it was inevitable. And I think we all knew at some stage that was going to go back the other way. Interest rates are going to go up. They're going to, and the government has always used interest rates as a yardstick, as a beat up stick when they think they want to control something. If you look back in history, I can certainly look back in the times that I've been involved. They've always used interest rates as a way to put the brakes on, curb the market, change the rules, change the game, change the whole thing if they can, just because, and then they use interest rates, lower them when they want to fuel the market, which they've actually successfully done of recent years. So I think I'm not too surprised. I don't think most of the people that will be viewing us and watching this and just generally understanding what's going on in the media will actually say that they are surprised at the interest rates going up. It's interesting that you say that there was a 5 to 4 decision situation where people want to make it go up higher than the 0.5% that we are at. And I think, again, the reason is that they're trying to fast track, and it's almost like an emergency brake operation, if you want to use that as an analogy in the car, as opposed to a soft pedal to say, look, we're going to need to slow this economy down. We need to slow the property market down, and we need to do this, which is what the 0.25 now to 0.5 and gradual. But then there's the other train of thought where they say, look, let's just slam the anchors, slam the brakes down, stick it up to 1%, and make everybody think, oh, blimey, oh, hang on a minute, this is like a knee-jerk reaction. Now, I think, whichever route they take, you're absolutely right in suggesting that the interest rates are still so low that it's really not going to put off the people that really want to buy and invest and so forth, because the returns, when you look back at the figures that we've been looking at over the last several weeks, years, how they have actually just, gone in one direction, it doesn't take away the interest from people that want to buy a home or a investment property, because the returns are too good. And even if it was 1%, even if it went up to 5%, in all honesty, it will still show that potentially the capital growth return in the property, not the general buy to let and hand to mouth situation, but the actual capital growth that you're getting back is still a very viable proposition. And people will say, well, actually, you know what, where am I getting that return from? If I don't, there's no, and I have said many a times on our show that one of the faults of the government is that they don't bring in alternative investments. If they did, we wouldn't be having this yo-yo effect that we now live with. And part of that is their own doing. Part of it is it suits them. And it doesn't matter which color is in, red or blue or yellow or whatever the colors are going to be. They all use the property market, and have done as long as I've been in it, as the way that they actually rule the country. If things are going great, let's put the brakes on the property market. And if things aren't going so well, let's put it on. Let's just change the property rules, and that's what's happening each time. And that's what's happened here in having the interest rates go up. Yes, it's going to be, but there are obviously bigger issues, Paul, that are going to be looming, which we'll cover in a short while.
Yes, I mean, it's not going to faze the average home buyer, but I tell you, the one group of people who must be looking over their shoulder are the landlords, of course, because not only do they already pay far higher mortgage rates, they're also subject to stricter affordability requirements. So if interest rates do continue to climb, they may face increased costs, which will inevitably have to be passed on to tenants, or they might just decide, you know what, there's not enough in it for me anymore. So the landlords might well be the first people to feel the pinch, do you think?
Well, like I said, if you look at it from hand to mouth, i.e., I've got a borrowing and I get a rental income of X, and then all that rental income is doing is keeping me at a level, i.e., paying the cost, the tax, the mortgage payments, etc., and then you're left with nothing almost as a profit. What the return of the investment is, over the next year, 18 months, 2 years, is far greater. So even if they're buying as a buy to let, the investment, the capital return in the property will probably be, maybe another 10%. So let's say over the next year that rises. So at least they're making a clean 10% by being in it. You've got to be in it to win it, so to speak. So yes, it's sort of hand to mouth and it won't be that exciting. But what else do they invest in to get the return? You could put it in an ISA and you can leave it on the bank's thing. And yes, interest rates going up is probably going to help the saver a bit, but by how much? What would the saver get? Maybe 3%, maybe 4% in the return. It's still not as much as they would get as a capital return on the investment, providing the property market is continued to be fueled by the fact that people want to continue to invest. And then you've got the other side of the coin, and that is that, of course, there are the first-time buyers who can't get onto the ladder, who are going to continue to rent, because it is impossible at this moment in time to sort of say, okay, well, I'm going to go and get a mortgage. So the investor buyer may be the stronger buyer and will stay in the game because they've got the money to do so.
It's interesting to see that the foreign market is starting to return. And of course, that these interest rate rises won't affect them in the slightest. They won't be worried about that because they're coming from across Asia and they tend to finance their investments from banks closer to home. And in Hong Kong and Malaysia, for example, their interest rates are around 3 to 4%. So they're not going to be worried by this at all. So the return of the foreign investor is going to continue to fuel the market, particularly in the capital.
Yeah, I mean, and we've been expecting that for some time because whilst the pandemic was on, they weren't able to get in. But of course, now it is coming in, droves. And the only thing that is going to veer them off is some sort of taxation. But at that point, the government again has to think about what taxation do they want to apply, and do they really want to curb the foreign investor coming in, bringing their cash, in order to continue to help the marketplace. So it's a real balancing act that they've got to do, both with investors foreign, with cash coming in, and of course investors, in the UK, who then say, well, actually, my money is probably better in a property than it is sitting in the bank. So I think I can't see that the bank's rate increase is actually going to immediately curb the market that they may all be expecting to happen. I think it'll be a while yet, but whilst they use that as the tool, what they are doing is managing to increase the interest rate, and so claw back money that they've been spending elsewhere.
It's interesting to note because there's a few reports starting to emerge already about the furious activity in January, and if we thought it was going to calm down anytime soon, that's not happening. And there is a suggestion now that actually people had made up their mind that come the beginning of 2022 January, that's my time to move. I'm going to move. I'm going to start my new year with a house move. And looking at that activity and looking at still the fact that even the rates are going to be relatively low, and the fact that there is high levels of equity still in the marketplace and still poor demand. So what they're seeing is, and what's being reported is, that people are putting increasingly more equity into the property. So deposits are higher. People seem to have a lot of cash to put down so they can get a better rate on the deal. So that's just going to fuel everything the same way. There's 1.5 million people coming off of fixed rates this year. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens when they come to the end of that deal, when they're looking at, according to the experts here, 1% interest rates by the summer, 1.25 by the end of the year. So that's going to be quite a jump for them from where they've been on 0.25% or whatever.
Oh, look, £50, £60, £100 in your pocket every month will make a dent. It's a huge dent. But mortgage is not probably the only problem that's looming, as you know. The energy prices are shooting through the roof. And the announcements that were made this week of energy prices, I mean, it's beggars belief as to think that, it's almost going to be double within the next couple of years of what you think. And that takes me to a completely different story altogether, Paul, which is not something that we sort of probably have even thought about. And that is, they keep telling us that we're going to go electric and we're going to make everything electric. And yet here we are, not even down the electric route, and energy prices, gas prices, electric, fuels, other, types of energies that we're using are all shooting through the roof because they can't, get enough. And if they can't get enough of that, how are they ever going to get as much electricity, and how are we going to end up paying for that? I mean, it's quite a frightening thought. I've been thinking about that this week and thinking, it's all very well, people saying that. So apart from the mortgage rate, which is obviously going to hit, which people kind of expected, but what they didn't expect is what is about to hit the bank balances, direct debits, of maybe another £50 a month increase. Just in energy, and if you're having gas and electric at home, that's £100, give or take, plus your mortgage. Then you are going to start to create a problem, and that's not a government driven. That's the energy price. That's the energy company saying, we want to charge more money, and the government's turning around and saying, oh well, we'll refund it in a different way. But when it's gone, it's gone. It doesn't matter how much refunding you get. A couple of £100 isn't going to actually make a great deal of difference to people. So I think there are other things that actually will probably cause a bigger problem than I think what the mortgage rate rise is going to cause. But collectively, it may help them do what they've been trying to do, and it may be that they are responsible, underlying, behind the scene, to tell the energy companies that we can't whack up mortgage rates in a speedy way, but maybe you can whack up some, and that might slow people to buy properties. So they may use different methods, and I think that's probably another way of slowing the property market down. But they can slow it down as much as they like. In the history that I can actually put my own finger to, Paul, is that people will never stop buying. All they do is wait, and then when things have a correction, not necessarily house prices going down, but people calm down, they jump on it again and say, right, here we go. And whilst on the left-hand side, you've got interest rates and energy prices, on the right-hand side, you've got communication. Things like the Crossrail, which are 4 years behind, is actually going to come together during this year of 22. And when that comes together, that will bring another type of dynamic for people that are going to buy properties, perhaps not so much in the London area, but on the outskirts, wherever it's reaching to, up to Reading, for example. All of those will get fueled up. So there are many mixes that we've got to consider here.
It's interesting to see whether the Bank of England actually looks to ease on mortgage regulation. So for those highly leveraged buyers, obviously, for who the higher affordability tests were quite a struggle. Be interesting to see that whether the bank actually wants to move back and ease back on those requirements to allow people to continue to get homes. Because at the moment, obviously, as that mortgage rate rises and the affordability ceiling there for people, they start hitting that, and less people will be able to get mortgages. So it'll be an interesting one.
Well, they will allow different multiples. That's what they've done. I mean, when I go back again in time, we started actually back in the day. It was 1 and 1.5 times. So 1.5 times the senior person, i.e. the higher earner, and one times the second person. If you're earning, I don't know, £50,000, it'd be £75,000 of yours, and then maybe 25,000. You got £100,000 in total in borrowing. Then that went up to 2.5 times plus 1, and then it went up to 2.5 times joint, and then it went up to 3, and now I believe it can be anything up to 6 or 7% of the income in order to get the borrowing. So the chances are the ratios, the multiples will change. And they may make the criteria tighter, but the actual lending criteria, the bottom line tighter, but the process, i.e. the multiples in order to get to that, may get higher. And so therefore, people will still find another way to go and borrow the money that they need to achieve the goals that they want to achieve. And that is actually ultimately buying their own home, their first home.
Moving on to a completely different subject and making the show truly global today, we're going to just have a quick look at what's going on in Canada and ask a philosophical question, Joe, because I know these ones tend to get you riled, so that's always a good thing. But it's interesting to look over at what's happening in Canada at the moment, and we have touched on this before, because they are, if you take our property market and then put a bomb under it, that's basically what was going on over there. They've got growth going out of their ears, literally. For example, at the moment, 2021 was up 20% from the year before. House prices now, the average is 720,000 Canadian dollars, according to the Canadian Real Estate Association. It's a really interesting read, this, actually. If you can find this on Property Investor Post, it's a really interesting read, because they're introducing some interesting tax from a government perspective, which are trying to control the furore that's going on. And they have done this before with some success in the 70s. So let me explain. And it comes down to the fundamental philosophical question I wanted to touch on with you, which is housing a fundamental human right, or is it, or should it be, a tradable commodity, or is it actually both? So basically, the country has had seen untold property growth. 2020 was a record year. They'd already beaten that by November of 2021. And that was the biggest house volumes of sales. More than 100,000 more homes, 100,000 more homes were sold in 2021 compared to 2020. So you can see what it's like. And again, they've got the same issues as us: low inventory, not enough stock on the market, and of course they've got low interest rates as well. Now, what's happening is that the bulls have got back into the housing market, basically. So what's happening is, of course, is that these people are saying, well, look, I've got money to invest. I'm a business person. I've got money, or I'm a business that was doing one particular type of trade, and now I'm going to move over to get into property, because investors are flipping houses to make capital gains, which, of course, at 20% a year, why wouldn't you? And they're now the biggest buyers in Ontario, for example. Which has been published by, this is all reported in a company called Terranet in Toronto. And they're revealing that these multi-property buyers, who are termed as investors and not dwellers, are now accounting for 1/4 of all the buyers in Toronto. So basically what's happened is that's pretty much priced the first-time buyers out the market. Everybody's buying properties, flipping them over, turning them over at a profit some few months later for a good 10 or 15 or 20%, depending on what's happening in that particular month, of course. And in British Columbia, they've now put in a tax called a speculation tax, which has been also adopted in other states, and they're just about to put it into Toronto as well. I think Ontario's got it as well. And this basically puts a levy on anyone who's a foreign buyer buying the property who is not going to live in it, or indeed anyone who wants to buy a property that's not going to live in it, so that protects doesn't make it such a good investment, should I say, and protects from the opportunist flipper on property. And when they did this in the 1970s, interestingly, Joe, when prices were rising at 30% annually, they managed to slow the inflation of prices to single digit. Although you could argue that they also had high mortgage rates at that time, which was having a call on the market, just to be completely fair. But it's an interesting thought. And so there are two questions out of all of that come out for me. Is housing a given right, or is it something that should be left to market forces, and you can sit there and trade these things like a commodity? And should we, the second question, should we introduce some similar sort of tax, which has worked before for Canada and seems to be working again now, to actually try and make sure that there is fairness in the market and not those with the most get everything?
Yeah, it's an interesting analogy, actually, when you look at what's been happening in Canada by comparison to what is happening, perhaps, or happened in the UK. So to answer all of your questions, I'm not going to say. Otherwise you'll say, here he is. He just said it all. It's all rubbish. Now I'm not going to say it's rubbish. I think the fact is that. Is buying a home a commodity or a right? And I think it is. Unfortunately, it's a bit of both, and we have that here as well. So people actually want to step on the property ladder because A, it provides a home, and B, they feel comfortable and confident that when they bought something that is actually going to increase in value, so they've got an investment at the same time. So that is the correct, probably, mechanism. But because there are no other investments that people feel comfortable and confident in, they trade in property, and cash is king. So the people that have the cash available will go out and buy properties or buy opportunities and then flip them, as you would say, or do them up and sell them on for a profit. But that's because they have the cash. Because those that don't have the cash and those that are going to go through the mortgage process will only fundamentally do two things. One is to buy to let, because they can borrow the money and then rent that out. And the first one, of course, is to buy to live in as their own property and first home. But things like people buying and investing in Canada and flipping them for 20%, it kind of happened here too, and it still does happen here. I'm not saying it doesn't. People do buy a property if they are in a position, and as you know, as an auctioneer, we have many people that buy properties cash. They take the opportunity, and then they will look at it and say, okay, can I do something else with this? Can I enhance it in some sort of planning? And we'll get a planning gain and then put it back on the market and sell it to somebody else who's got a planning gain, and they want to try and make sure that they get an uplift on it. So I think it is a bit of both in terms of that. The other question in terms of the tax, I think that's another way to put a brake on things, and that's probably a brake for investors, inward investors who are coming into the country who think, hang on a minute, I'll just buy in Canada. I've been sitting in Hong Kong, or I'm sitting in Russia, or wherever it is, and I've got £1,000,000, and I could actually, all right, Canada's going well, so let's me go in there and buy. And yes, some sort of tax element will obviously curb those buyers, but those buyers will find another place. If it's not Canada, it'll be the UK. If it's not UK, they'll probably find somewhere else in the world that is doing well, and those will never go away. And many governments don't want those people to go away, really, primarily because they are the ones that are keeping the backbone of that property economy going. Because of the investment, we know that. Just take in London, for example, we know that when throughout the pandemic, people weren't able to travel, the London market was probably much, much softer or quieter than our national market, where people were actually moving around the country because of the pandemic, trying to get, the race for space situation. So the London market was slightly slower because the foreigners never came in. But now that that's opened up, you can see that reversal is happening in London. And so, the prices are beginning to go up in London. Also, what is available in terms of stock is selling. The biggest problem that most of us as agents have is we can't get the right stock on. Because if the right stock was on, there's a buyer for everything. So I think the answer to that question is yes. I think it is a bit of both, but the taxation would help stop. But do you really want? I mean, there is a massive difference. One massive difference that we have to bear in mind here. We are an island, so we are limited for space, whereas Canada has plenty of space, as an example. So whilst there might be areas that are very, very popular to live in, there are also plenty of space. So it's not as if like there's shorter space. We are physically shorter space. So we can either go up or down, but we can't really go out much. And so that's probably the one big difference.
But the government can't have it both ways, can they? They can't say that they want to help first-time buyers get on the ladder and then allow no restrictions on foreign buyers coming into the country and buying up the stock that was there for the first-time buyers, especially if they're not providing the new affordable homes in the first place, which they promised they would, and they haven't hit their targets on and got anywhere close to. So I agree with you. They want the foreign investment because also that brings in all kinds of other things and obviously continues to fuel the market. But you can't be sincere about first-time buyers and helping them if you don't have some kind of curb. And at least you could say in Canada, well, okay, there will be people that still want to buy in Canada, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, they're not opening the floodgates, and you can just take the problem somewhere else, and then another government can deal with it, another country can deal with the problem.
Yeah, as I said, the investors will find another place. It doesn't matter if they've been told that the tax is going to be too high. They'll just go, okay, today it's not Canada, tomorrow it's UK. If it's not UK, it might be Hong Kong or some other exotic place that they think they're going to get an investment, the Bahamas, for example, or whatever. So they'll find somewhere else where that's going to get the return, because at the end of the day, they're investors. They want the best return for their money. The government can do both things, Paul, and it does do that because it does lip service. It's going to do a lip service to the first-time buyers and say, we're doing everything to help you. Equally, behind the scenes, they're going to go to the investor and say, come on in, bring your dollars in here, your rupees and your yens or whatever they're going to be, because we need that money coming in from the outer world in order to stimulate the market that we have. So they're spinning the two plates, really, and they've long done it. It's not as if they haven't done it. Everyone has done it, because they've never hit the targets, and they're never likely to hit the targets. And if they hit the targets, there'll be a crash.
Talking of targets, there's another load from this fella. And I have to say, I just want to include this story, Joe, for one of the most bizarre quotes from any politician I think I've ever seen, rather. And we'll come to that in just a second. But this, just to put the story into context before we go any further. So this week, the government's new Levelling Up white paper was revealed to radically reshape the private rental sector. Kind of deja vu about a lot of this. Mr. Gove's been on the platform, and I don't know who the speechwriter is, but it's some jingoistic 12-year-old, I should imagine, allegedly. But I'll show you the quote. I'll tell you the quote in a minute. It's absolutely priceless. Section 21 eviction powers, which is the reason why it's a story on our programme, amongst other things today, will be scrapped. All properties in the private rental sector will have to meet a new minimum decent homes standard. A new consulting on introducing a landlord's register will be launched. There'll be a fresh effort to clamp down on rogue landlords. More will be done to help get people onto the housing ladder. Where have we heard that before? While there'll also be greater focus on creating more affordable social housing. This was the Levelling Up white paper, which was revealed this week. The document, according to the government, will set out a plan to transform the UK by spreading opportunity and prosperity to all parts of it. So just interesting to get your comments on one of those. There'll be 12 national bold missions, which we'll come to in a moment. But the Section 21 eviction powers will be scrapped. What's your thoughts on that, Joe?
Well, it's interesting. I've had quite a lot of comments on that this week and read quite a bit about a difference of opinions on what it really means. And it's all about opinion, really, at the end of the day. I mean, how are they going to be able to say to somebody that the ultimate reason behind abolishing this Section 21 is called fairness? It's about fairness to someone. So, in other words, a landlord cannot give notice just because he feels he wants to give notice. Now, it's such a grey area in terms of why a landlord may want to give notice. Of course, it may be that they've actually had a fallout as a landlord and tenant, and basically the tenant hasn't done what they were going to do, or the landlord hasn't, and they've had a fallout. But that may be seen as unfair in the eyes of the law, and therefore the tenant is likely to stay on and continue to be a nuisance to a landlord, or continue to have a dialogue that means that, and it may be that the tenant might turn around and say, oh, well, actually, because you haven't done that leaky tap, I'm going to knock 50 quid off of the next month's rent because you haven't done this. So it's really, I don't think it's particularly levelling in the sense that they want to do away with it. What they could do is maybe put some caveats in it of what are the reasons. But what they want to do is to do away with the Section 21, and its fundamental reason is about fairness. Now, what is fair to you may not be fair to me. What is fair to Mr. Gove may not be fair to somebody else. And I think that's where the problem's going to become. So we'll have the legal system will be absolutely mobbed with arguments. The winners will be the lawyers, because they're all going to be employed to go and argue what is fair, Your Honour. You know, I believe that this is not fair because that's what he said. And so it's like having a couple of kids in the playground and having a teacher sort of say, you know, that's not fair, Charlie, you should treat him such and such and do an apology. And I just see it just becoming an absolute mess. There's the old adage here, do not fix something that's not broke. And what Mr. Gove is doing in his new role as levelling up is probably shoveling up rather than levelling up lots of rubbish out of a system just to prove that he's doing a job. So, and I'm sure many people have a view on that, but I think it's about an opinion. And the opinion is that, you know, what is right for one may not be right for the other. And that's the bottom line. What I read about it, what I understand, and somebody will definitely phone in or message in and say, I'm completely, you know, off the wall on this. But my understanding is that it is about what is fair. And that's
Yeah.
why they want to abolish the Section 21. And my belief is that what is fair? What is fair to you is not going to be fair to me. So I think they're creating a bigger problem here by actually doing away with something that actually wasn't that broke. But what they could talk about is putting notices and putting a longer time and so forth, which they did in a way during pandemic. They turned around and said, for a certain period, 6 months, you can't do X, Y, Z. You can't move people out. You can't do this. They use certain yardsticks, but you can't just have someone living in a place because they felt it was unfair. I mean, they might want to sell the place. What is fair? I want to sell my property and I want you to move out. Well, I think that's unfair. I don't want you to sell my property, so I don't want to move out. So where does that work? How does that work? I'm playing devil's advocate, but those are the type of silly arguments that it could be. I've given my tenant notice because actually I want to sell the property. The tenant says, I think that's unfair. I've been paying my rent all the time and I've looked after it. Why do you want to sell it?
It seems that the balance is moving towards the tenant in all of this, because if you look at the sum of the parts here, you've got a crackdown on road landlords, which nobody would complain about, but you've also got the introduction potentially, or the consultation at least now, on whether we should have a landlord's register. So again, sort of cleaning up and tidying up around the landlord side of things, more regulation, more compliance for the landlords to have to adhere to, and of course the reduction in the Section 21. So it's almost like it's, and I'm sure it's a vote winner, for all the tenants that are out there who are thinking of voting for the Tory party. Here we are, we've got all of this in your favour, not far off of an election, and here we have all these measures designed to give you more of a voice against that bully of a landlord. That's the way it feels from the way it's written here.
No, and you're absolutely right. It is exactly that. It is weighed much, much heavily towards the tenant. And of course, that's the sort of thing, this is the sort of thing that will curb investors away from it, because they just don't want the hassle, don't want the problem. So they'll say, okay, well, I want to do that. But then you ask the government, what are they really doing? They're reducing the available stock in the marketplace that the investors buy and bring in to tenant the homeless people that are on their list, on the government list, which they can't house because they've sold their stock off in the Thatcher years and got no stock to rent out. So, I really don't think that they've actually thought about it from a layman's point of view, because I always give my views based on me as a layman. I'm not giving a view as a politician or an expert in this. I just think that I don't think they've actually thought about it really. And I think they just thought this is a good idea, as they do most often, put it out there, and then probably will have to do a U-turn, because that's something that they're very good at doing, when they realise that actually they spent all these millions of pounds doing a whopping great report and all these targets, and then find that they actually can't deliver it. Just not honest with themselves. And that's hard to do, obviously, as a politician, let alone be honest with people. It's hard to be honest with yourself. So, I can't imagine that Mr. Gove is going to do anything for the Section 21 for levelling. And I'm sure there's other areas that you're going to bring up in a minute, which we're going to cover, which he's got a list of things that are probably more unrealistic than Section 21.
Well, yes, there's 12 bold national missions. You'll be pleased to know I'm not going to go through all of them. They're all to be completed by 2030, which when probably Michael Gove will have retired by then, so he won't be held to account, I suspect, on all of that sort of thing. But the reduction in the non-decent rented homes by 50%, that's interesting language, isn't it? Obviously, a secure path for renters to ownership. No detail on all of this yet, of course. A commitment to build further affordable housing. And by the way, if I can just backtrack a second for you, Joe, in that previous story, I've just reminded myself of a fact on it. That tax that was being put in in Canada, the money that was raised for that tax was directly spent on building affordable housing, which I thought was quite credible and laudable in that. So just while I remember to put that fact out there, they used that money that they got from those foreign investors and those that were flipping properties. They were using that money, or they will be using that money to fund new housing, which I thought was very credible. And also in there now, here's the interesting stuff. So we're talking about supporting 20 of our towns and city centres, starting with Wolverhampton and Sheffield, undertaking ambitious King's Cross style regeneration projects, restoring, transforming derelict urban sites into beautiful communities. Now, this is really interesting. It's going to be spearheaded by Homes England, apparently, on top of what they already have to do for a living, and no doubt there'll be no extra money for them to get more staff for that. But what's really interesting here is, you've got, and I know this from being there, Birmingham and Wolverhampton very close together. You can see the difference in the way that those towns and cities have transformed, because the council and the local government there has made a commitment in Birmingham to really transform their city over this last probably 2 decades in reality. And Wolverhampton hasn't. And that's why there's a disparity. It's got nothing to do with where it's based. It's to do with how it's managed, surely. But now it looks like the government's going to come and say, well, if you haven't been able to do that, we'll have to do it for you. Because, Birmingham's made a real go of it and has done a fantastic job, whereas Wolverhampton hasn't. And yet they've both had, in theory, the same opportunity, because they're both very close to each other in the same geographically, in the same part of the country.
Absolutely, and I could say that even more closer to home. Forget about Birmingham and Wolverhampton. I mean, places like Slough, for example, are just a disaster because the management has been so awful by the incumbent council and its bodies that the town looks, well, it's not. I can't find the words other than disgraceful, probably, for all the other investment that has gone into the town. The actual town doesn't look very good. But Michael Gove is suggesting in his Levelling Up that the northern part is where he wants to spend the money, by the sounds of things, Birmingham, Wolverhampton, and other areas, because he thinks that that's the future. That's where everybody's going to go to.
Well, that's where the votes are going to come from.
That's where the votes are coming from, and that's what he's going for, because they've managed to pretty much cheese off everybody down in London. So they're now going elsewhere and thinking, well, maybe we'll get a few more hands up over there because we want to spend some money in Wolverhampton, which is fine. Wolverhampton's a very nice area, and I'm sure it's growing well, and it's got a good network and everything works for it. But all they're trying to do is, and that's why we laugh about it, because I remember we talked about when Michael Gove was given the new job as a Levelling Up minister. Now I can see what he's doing. I wouldn't say it's more levelling up; it's more shoveling up rather than that, because all he's doing is shoveling it around the town, around the country, where it can work and where it can't work, and that's the agenda for the government.
He talks of the 80-20 rule, which leads to 80% of government funding for housing supply being directed at maximum affordability areas. So in practice, any investment for London and the South East is going to be scrapped. 1.8 billion on brownfield funding instead being diverted to transforming brownfield sites in the North and the Midlands, and the Metro mayors will be allocated 120 million of this funding. So it really is a shift in emphasis from any development in the southeast to the north. But it'll be interesting, isn't it? Because if you think about it, in the private sector, as you've said in the past, the interest from the private sector will still be where the real wealth is in the south.
Yeah, because the returns are there, the communication network is there, and it's going to take many years of investment and time to get them. And they've tried it, Paul. It's not as if they haven't. You look at Leeds, you look at Liverpool, you look at Hull, you look at all of those areas where they've either been, successful in the bid for the city, European city of the world, and all sorts of money that has gone into the infrastructures, all of those things. But has it? It has done so, but people still come to the bright lights of London. They still want to be in the south, and that's the bit that you can't get out of their heads. So what they need to do is almost turn the country on its head and make London in the north and the rest of it in the south. And maybe that would work, and maybe they'd all just fall down and think, well, actually, I'll go to Liverpool, or I'll go to, Scunthorpe, or whatever it is that they're going to go to, because that's now the better area because it's down south. But I'm not sure that is the way people think, and it's not just the people; it's also the youth. The youth want to be in town; they want to be in London. It's one of the biggest cities of the world, and that's what they want to sort of thrive on. And that happens not just here in England. I mean, it happens in all the big cities, Paris, New York, everywhere. It always attracts the new blood. And afterwards they move out, but that's just the way the system has got used to.
I suppose for the balance of fairness, you could say that Mr. Gove probably realises that there'll be a lot of private investment in the south, and therefore no one's particularly going to be bothered in some of these more difficult, challenging areas in the north, and therefore they perhaps need government stimulus, perhaps. But I wanted to come to this quote to finish on today, to end with a positive note, and at least a smile on our face, because I love this. This is what he said. The United Kingdom is an unparalleled success story. We have one of the world's biggest and most dynamic economies. Ours is the world's most spoken language. We have produced more Nobel Prize winners than any other country other than America. So we're actually second. But not everyone shares equally in the UK's success. For decades, too many communities have been overlooked and undervalued, and some areas have flourished. Others have been left in a cycle of decline. The UK is like a jet engine firing on only one engine. It's very jingoistic. We've had more Nobel Prize winners than any other country other than America.
Other than America. Yeah.
I've just never heard a politician speak like that. I mean, who is the speechwriter? Who's done the research? And what's Nobel Prize winners got to do with levelling up? It's just bizarre.
I know, but they'll find anything just to make it sure. I told you, it's not levelling up; it's shoveling up, Paul.
Shoveling something, that's for sure. Anyway, and on that bombshell, we must leave it there because we're out of time as always. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed our chat today. I hope you found it stimulating, interesting, and of course, always get involved with the comments down below on the video wherever you're watching us today. Thanks for your time. We'll see you again next week.